civilization. What in the world does that mean? Let's figure that out.
The community of shared destiny, right? For all mankind. I mean, that's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, and what about win-win cooperation? That's so I mean some of their slogans work. I mean, a socialist market economy with Chinese characteristics is just kind of hilarious, I think. So let's do something like that. But I'm still pretty struck by the relative underperformance of Chinese diplomats, and you guys will have more views about this. But I think what was really striking was that earlier this summer, a few months ago, there was a brief but fatal border skirmish between Thailand and Cambodia, right?
Mm.
And what I was really struck by was that this conflict wasn't mediated by Washington, D.C. It wasn't mediated by Beijing. It was mediated by Malaysia. And it seems like, there's plenty of, people, even, especially the neighbors of China that do not trust China. And I don't see that reversing very easily anytime soon. And I think that what China wants is at least dominance of its near neighbors. I mean, Taiwan is a certainty. They absolutely want that. And maybe what they want is for folks in the Philippines to regularly go to China and kowtow for the emperor's pleasure. And that might be pretty bad. But HR, what do you think about Chinese diplomats? Are they winning? Or how's the global civilization initiative going?
Yeah, I don't think it's going well at all. And I think this is where we're missing opportunities, of course, Chinese diplomats, among other things, are afraid of the party leadership. So my encounters with them have always been just a reading off of cards, and I mean, you can't get them to crack a smile. You can't get to get off script at all. I mean, I'm thinking my main interlocutor was Yang Jin. The one person actually who I felt like I could have a real conversation with was Liu He. And then of course he's out of the picture now. So I think there's a great deal of pressure on them to conform, to this kind of Xi Jinping thought and the effect that Wang Huning has had, on all of these people with this convoluted, Xi Jinping thought, which is really unintelligible. So I think a lot of it is their fear of making a mistake makes them ineffective interlocutors or ineffective, as you mentioned, in mediating in a crisis, for example.
Yeah. And that also illustrates that it's not engineers right at the top running the People's Republic of China. And I think it's important to go back to something Dan said earlier about the hubris of 2020. When I was writing my last book, Doom, I concluded very skeptically that China would do as well as Xi Jinping thought it would in 2020. And I think that's been vindicated. But 5 years on, I think I agree with you about one important point, Dan. If you look at what Noah Smith calls the electric tech stack, if you look at the ways in which China has raced up the value chain, you're right. Made in China 2025 has been a resounding success. And so I give you that. Things now look, in fact, better for Xi Jinping than they did when I was writing Doom. And correspondingly, the US doesn't seem to have a great answer to Chinese dominance in particularly electricity generation. The most dramatic chart you can show right now is the one showing the massive increase in Chinese electrification that there's been.
Which is related, obviously, to the AI tech stack as well, and everything, and industrial manufacturing. Absolutely, Neil.
So here's my question, Dan. Where's the succession plan for Xi Jinping? Because the one thing that no number of engineers can solve is how an autocracy handles the succession problem. And there, it seems to me, a vulnerability has been created by the extension of Xi's term in office. How do you think about politics at the very top? Because rumors swirl about that very subject, and it seems like a key vulnerability that takes us back to the rule of law, constitutional governance, and institutions that China lacks.
Yeah, well, I think that it is absolutely one of the great vulnerabilities of China, and there's absolutely no way around it, that Xi, by centralizing power in his own person, such that he can be emperor until at his pleasure, and failing to designate a successor, because one cannot possibly designate a successor in authoritarian systems. That is just too difficult to do. There is no broad solution to the succession problem in authoritarian systems. So that's just kind of not possible. And so I think that is going to be a source of giant risk to the system. And I think China is also a country that I call a Leninist technocracy with grand opera characteristics. So they are Leninist because obviously they are ruled by a cadre of revolutionaries that see itself to be heaving the population into modernity by hook or by crook. They are broadly technocratic. I think, we can't take a look at how straight their trains are or how good their bridges are and not understand it as a broadly technocratic place, which is able to do plenty of good reforms. But then there is always something of the Wagnerian entrance into Valhalla. And I know, Neil, you're an opera fan, so you understand this reference. But they just have a sense of the apocalyptic, a sense of the theatrical about themselves. And it is really easy for them to veer into some sort of, apocalyptic thinking, some sort of manifesting the eschaton or something. And so that is absolutely one of these, just living in China, there is kind of this apocalyptic sense that hangs over a lot of people. And one felt this very acutely over zero COVID, the entirety of which I lived through. You never really know when your office building is going to have some sort of a lockdown, your home will have some sort of a lockdown. And even if you're an elite in Beijing, an elite within the party state, an elite working at a tech company or a finance company, everyone has something to fear because they're going to come to the finance people. They're going to, crack down on some sort of tech company, or they're going to purge your patron inside the military party state, and then your entire network will unravel. And that is always going to be a part of China as well.
So, Dan, we talked about physical engineering. Let's talk about social engineering for a second. You experienced COVID in China, so you know what it's like firsthand to go through lockdowns and tracking apps and so forth. How long can China maintain social engineering? At what point will there be a reckoning? In other words, people can only live under a thumb for a certain point.
Yeah, well, I think that I would say that broadly speaking, physical engineering, though it has a lot of costs, is mostly pretty positive. That it is good to have new bridges for people in Shanghai or wherever else in Guizhou who
Right.
didn't have subway lines. Now they get subway lines, and didn't have a lot of parks. Now they have a lot of parks. That's pretty positive, and that gives people a sense of optimism for the future. But all of that is weighed down because the fundamental problem with China is that they are not just physical engineers, they're also fundamentally social engineers. And I think it is, we can see evidence of social engineering everywhere. The folks in Tibet, as well as Xinjiang, these ethno-religious minorities, especially in Xinjiang, who are shunted off into detention camps. I write a lot about the one-child policy, as well as zero COVID, in which the numbers right there in the names. And there's no ambiguity about what these policies could possibly mean. It's a social optimization problem. And I think, what these, traumas, I think the Communist Party has been extremely effective at visiting traumas at a regular clip of once every generation. You could have, lived through the Great Leap Forward, and then you lived through the Cultural Revolution, then you lived through one-child policy. There's still, that's on one side of the ledger. On the other side of the ledger are new subway stations and new parks and new cafes and, better class of goods that you're able to consume. And, you're given, perhaps if you're an urban elite, 2 or 3 apartments that you can, that is given to you by the state, one of which you liquidate. And then, you're able to send your kid off to USC and buy her a Mercedes on the side as well. And so, I think these things are balances. What's something that really helps with zero COVID and the memory of it is alcohol, which plenty of Shanghainese are able to access. And so, these are the sort of things that always have to be balanced between a growing standard of life in material aspects as well as economic aspects, along with this political trauma. I don't think it resolves in any simple way. It becomes a deeply personal decision for people about what they ought to do.
Hey, Dan, there was that famous Bill Clinton quotation about, hey, good luck trying to control the internet. It's like, nailing Jello to the wall.
Now, there's no question China has been trying to crack down on the internet. Good luck. That's sort of like trying to nail Jello to the wall.
But it seems like they've done kind of a good job, at using social media and the internet to control the population. and control the message that is given to the Chinese people about the greatness of the party, what the party's achieving for them, the decadence of the West, how the West trying to keep them down. What are the opportunities that you see to kind of reach the Chinese people, and with different sources of information, and maybe generate the kinds of relationships that over time might result in an evolution of the nature of the CCP or the government there, such that it ceases its kind of hostility to the West, to representative government, to the free market economic system. I mean, what are the prospects for change, and then how do we communicate effectively and engage in do our part in the cognitive war that's kind of going on?
Right. Well, first of all, nail Jello to the wall. That's a weird image. I've never tried nailing Jello to the wall. I'd like to talk to the Clinton speechwriter who came up with that line. Well, let me share a little bit, HR, of my experiences of living in China during the first trade war, from basically 2018 to 2020. And initially, I thought that a lot of Chinese felt comfortable with Trump. He's this sort of a figure that they recognize, this business figure that says weird stuff, and then they, kind of erratic. And Trump had always been saying good things about the Chinese. And every time he talked about top leader Xi Jinping, he would always talk about, Xi's great head of hair, a coif of well pomaded hair. And it was really only and people felt comfortable with Trump. Trump seemed to be much meaner towards Germans or Japanese instead. And that all really fell apart in 2020 when Trump started calling it, the con flu or the China virus. People felt very deeply offended by those types of remarks in particular. And a lot of Chinese felt this sense of hostility with things like the China Initiative, all sorts of crazy rhetoric from particular politicians. Let's say a member of Congress somewhere to say something really mean that offended them. And I think it is the right approach to say that the grievances that the U.S. has is on the level of the Chinese Communist Party, not on the level of the Chinese people. But I think there is naturally still a lot of admiration that Chinese feel for Americans for being wartime allies and building Tsinghua University with Boxer indemnities, and Hollywood and Disney. That is still really, really appealing in all sorts of ways. And I think that Chinese naturally look up to America, and I want America to be the strongest that it can be, to be the best version of itself that it can be, such that the infrastructure does not always feel like it is falling apart absolutely everywhere, especially in New York as well as California, which is the first port of call for a lot of Chinese. Not to feel like Shanghai is just an obviously better city, which right now it is, but let's not have the difference be so stark. And to keep creating the culture and not be super inflammatory. I think all of that would be highly positive.
The danger, of course, Dan, is that one day people look back on your book and say he made just the same mistake that the Webbs made in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. They looked at all the extraordinary achievements of the planned economy. They were dazzled by everything from Magnitogorsk to the new look Moscow. And then they said, look how many more engineers they graduate here than in Britain. Clearly, the Soviet Union is the future. And my sense is that while it's true that China's clearly outperformed the Soviet Union economically, has a much more vibrant private sector than it ever did, there is still this sense that the fundamental operating system of a one-party state is fatally flawed, not least because it denies people the most foundational of liberties, and in particular, it doesn't protect the property rights of those who are successful. My theory is that if the United States actually could sort out its immigration policy and make itself more attractive to talent from Asia rather than less attractive, which is its current strategy, then it really would be pretty hard to beat the US, because the US would just always attract the talent in a way that China never can. So I love the book, but I have this sneaking suspicion that it might look very, very different 20 years down the line.
I am sure it will. And, as Kane said, in the long run, we're all dead. And as friend of the pod, Stephen Kotkin says, in the short run, we're all dead. So we're all dead no matter what. But let's at least get the short run right and figure out a lot of the things that, frankly, the U.S. should do, which is build more housing, build better mass transit, and fix our manufacturing base as well. That's my call to action for the U.S.
All right, gentlemen, an exit question, and it's an offbeat one. To read Dan Wong is to understand that he is a world traveler and he looks at food and he uses food as part of his calculation for the health of a society, the progress of society. So all three of you are world travelers, so I'd like to ask you this question. If you were to take me to one place in the world for stellar cuisine, where would you take me? Dan, you go first.
Let's say Tokyo.
Tokyo. Why?
It has a little bit of the best of a lot of different things. It is, the Japanese are able to make even the best Neapolitan pizzas. I feel this is just so unfair that they're able to master even the Italian pizzas. So Tokyo, low-end cuisine, high-end cuisine, most amazing food city in the world.
HR, where would you
Well-
take me? And don't you dare say Philadelphia and cheesesteaks.
Hey, I kind of agree with Dan. I mean, it is pretty fantastic in Japan. But hey, in the United States, South Philadelphia, I mean, great Italian food. I mean, how could I not say that? I have to say that,
Yeah, Neil, I would note that Dan thinks the best food in the United States is in Austin, Texas, a city you're more than familiar with. Where would you take me, Sir Neil? Where would we go to eat?
Oh, Milan. I'm sorry, the Italians are still better at all of this than everybody, even now better than the French. And I think Milan would beat even Tokyo. Though I share your admiration for Japan and Japanese cuisine, as do my younger children who are campaigning for a trip to Tokyo. I think mainly to binge on sashimi. So yeah, I'm just going to raise a glass of Barolo to the Italians. They are still the place. They have the culture I most like to eat in. Let me put it that way.
Well said. So
after a week in Japan with my wife, though, we both agreed that we felt like dolphins when we were leaving because we ate so much. We ate way too much raw fish.
okay. The book again, it's a New York Times bestseller, Breakneck China's Quest to Engineer the Future. Dan, where else can we find you besides your book and the Hoover Institution website?
My website, danwong.co.
Okay. Great conversation. Thanks for joining us. Come back soon.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Gentlemen, it's 8 o'clock, and let's try